Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.
All right, well, welcome. Today on the show, our guest is Mr. Brad Gregorich. He's the current principal at Hillcrest Elementary and a proud alumni of Rocky Mountain College, a former Battling Bear. Welcome,
Right.
Brad.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit about the job of being a transformative principal here. Maybe a little Battling Bear action. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, Brad, let's start. Tell us a little bit about your background as it relates to education and leadership.
Sure. So, as you know, got my undergrad degree at Rocky Mountain College up in Billings, Montana. First job out of school was in Sheridan, Wyoming. Taught fourth grade there for 5 years, and during that time, picked up my administration degree. Actually, going back to Rocky, I think I was in the third cohort of their educational leadership program. Through the opportunities there, had been in an internship at the junior high in Sheridan, and that was a really great experience. And a few years later, had an opportunity to go there as an assistant principal, learned for a few years, ended up back at my former elementary school as the head principal. And then my wife, who's from Gillette, we got married, started having kids, and it was time to get back closer to family. So we, saw some opportunities here in Gillette, and I applied for the position here at Hillcrest, and we made the move. This is year 5 in Gillette. And so, yeah, I've been here at Hillcrest, kind of worked through what was the COVID and the pandemic. And now we're kind of, storming into 2022, 23.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know, the topic that you and I talked a little bit about that we wanted to dive into today on the show was building the culture of your school. And I know you've been in a couple different schools and even districts. Like, I always think of Sheridan as having a really kind of distinct culture, which may be different, from elementary to middle or from Sheridan to Campbell County. But let's talk a little bit about what have you done, or what would you recommend new principals do coming in to have a focus on the culture of our school?
Yeah, I think it's culture is one of those things. I remember, I think it was after my first year as an assistant principal in Sheridan, I got an opportunity to go to a conference down in Atlanta. One of the phrases that I'd heard brought up there, and it just makes a ton of sense, especially coming, applies much the same in athletics. Culture trumps strategy. And so, culture has always been at the forefront of my mind. And it's one of those things where I don't think you've ever arrived with a building's culture. I think it's something you always have to have the pulse on, take the temperature of, and be actively working at maintaining and improving. And coming out of the pandemic, now that we're a couple of years removed, and I know everywhere around the country is in a little bit different place, but here in Wyoming, we're pretty well back to maybe what it was prior. But one of the things that I think we really have to focus on as a building is reestablishing culture, both for students and for staff. You had teachers. I've got a couple of teachers that are now, in their third year, where their first year, they were teaching kids with a mask. Kids weren't allowed to be even really near each other in the classroom, let alone, you got a first grade teacher, you're not asking them not to bring their kids up to the carpet type of situation. You're learning how to teach that. And, I had taken, from a culture perspective, I tried to take a lot off of teachers' plates at that time. It was a stressful environment. You've got trying to teach with masks, with the social distancing, not to mention kids coming in and out of the classroom, with quarantine restrictions and absenteeism related to that. So I've really thought that reestablishing culture and building culture now is as important as it ever has been, and maybe more so. And so, for a new principal coming in, you really have to be open and honest with your staff where you're at, and looking at for leadership on your staff and getting their feedback. I think there's very, very much identifiable action steps you can take, but culture, again, I'm just going to come back to a culture trumps strategy. you can have, great instructional practices, that knowledge, but you also have to have the teams and the building and that positive energy to create momentum going forward.
Well, when you come in new to the building as a principal, how do you first figure out where the culture is? Like, how do you gauge that? Because we can look at academic scores and accountability ratings and all that, but how do you, as the new principal, come in and measure current reality with the culture of the school?
You got to be visible. You got to be around. You got to be talking to people. I was fortunate, I think, stepping into Hillcrest Elementary. There was a really, really positive culture here, and there is to this day, but a very positive culture of why we were here, and that was supporting kids and really, turning over every rock to support the kids in the building. But as a new principal, the guy that I replaced, he'd been here. He'd started here as a teacher and worked his way up to be the building principal, and had been here, I think, nearly 2 decades. And so, that's a big void to fill. Stepping in somebody that is known, that the community knows, that the staff knows really well, and so it takes time. You have to have a lot of conversations, see what, and this is, my own personal philosophy, but I think it's backed up by a lot of, what you'll read is you have to see what's in place in a building. What are the structures? What are the systems that are in place, and explore those and learn about it. And then, have a process for making decisions and getting feedback for staff, and then eventually making change. My first year, I didn't ask for much change. My opening staff meeting was really about, why are we here? What's the purpose that we're here? And trying to learn from the staff, and then being open and honest to feedback from them in conversation. And then, as you work with your leadership team going into year 2, you can start making some adjustments. I'm not a big believer in coming in with the big stick and trying to make change in your first year. You got to learn.
Yeah. And especially if you're coming in to a school that's had consistent leadership, and, it sounds like a really ingrained culture, that could be different than like my situation, where you come into a building that's gone through a lot of turnover, and that can lead to its own unique culture.
Right.
Every year, every 2 years, new leadership that usually doesn't have a great impact on the culture of the staff. So how do you help your staff see, the culture that you want, that you're working towards? Do you guys, define that? Do you have a way that staff know if they're living up to it, or as a school we're at the point we want with our culture? What do you do to see where you're at with the culture?
Yeah. And so I think, one of the things, and I don't know where your school's at, but, coming out of, so last year as a building, our district provided some high quality professional development for elementary schools, actually for all schools, that was focused on, having an effective RTI model and process. So we had some good things going in our building in terms of, tiers of instruction and identified intervention times. And the principal before me and the instructional facilitator before me had really brought the staff together to start down the journey of being a professional learning community. So we had a lot of those things in place, but through that work in the RTI model, we had re-envisioned what our building's leadership team looked like. Came together as, we call it our guiding coalition, and this it's a cross section of the entire staff, and we're a big staff. So we have, right now we're about 415 kids, K6, and between certified and classified staff, about 70 adults in and out of the building through the course of a day. So it's a large building, large staff, and we needed to get input from everybody. And so our guiding coalition is comprised, it's a large team, but it's important to have that opportunity for everybody and on your staff to have representation, especially when it is so large. So it started, kind of revisiting our culture that way. And then coming in, or through that work, we identified one of our major needs was social emotional learning for our kiddos. We did some book studies, explored some resources, and eventually came to the Leader in Me program from Franklin Covey, 7 Habits of Happy Kids. And so we kind of started on that journey as a staff this fall, and that's been incredibly positive for culture. both for adults and for kids. In fact, we just ended the first quarter, had our first celebration assembly, had some kids getting up, talking and being, sharing how they are leaders in the building with the 7 habits. And that was tremendous.
Awesome.
But it was really cool. It's so cool to see a kindergartner get up and talk about how they're proactive, like, and speak confidently about it. I love it. But in addition to that, then there were some things. So the state of Wyoming, for school. So we went through a reflection process as the staff with that guiding coalition, and we used actually some tools from the WDE, and we reflected on several areas. And one of the areas, and I relate this back to part of I had taken things off the plate of teachers during the pandemic. We weren't having as many committee meetings, we weren't meeting before or after school as frequently, and that was in all honesty a bit of a survival response, and just trying to keep the stress level for the teachers as low as I possibly could. But what that led to is a breakdown of communication. And so what I appreciate about our leadership team is they were really honest with me and like where we were at with like top down and east-west communication as a building. And so, we had some great reflective conversations, and we are putting some things in place that we had prior to COVID. We're bringing, reconstituting committees and taking a look at how we make decisions as a building, and really just garnering that input from all stakeholders for a lot of the decisions that we make as a building. So, maybe the decision-making process slows down a little bit because you have that reciprocity of, committees out to teams, back to committees, back to the whole group. But ultimately, you're creating better clarity for your teachers on why we're doing what we're doing and the changes that we're making. So it was kind of using some of the tools that the State Department provided for us that were actually really valuable and are things that our staff want to use on a consistent basis now to help us reflect and continue to improve, and climate and culture being a top one.
Yeah.
And improving communication.
Did you guys go through the PLC Coaching Academy? Is that when you say tools, was that one of them?
No, it was the school improvement plan process. It was something new from WDE this year, different than what they've had in the past. And it was, there was a lot involved with it and quite a few steps, but actually some really good work to put in as a staff to make some decisions. So I was appreciative of it. I think it was really beneficial for us. And I love our staff. We have a great staff. We have great leaders that are willing to speak their mind and have, critical and crucial conversations. So even though I would say we have a tremendous culture here, it's something I'm always willing to continue to address and continue to try to improve.
Yeah. When you came into that school at Hillcrest, was there already a structure in place for a leadership team or a guiding coalition?
Yeah, there was. It was, but it was more focused on. It was more composed of classroom teachers, and so one of the things that we kind of recognized is that we had a leadership team of classroom teachers that did a lot of great work. But then we had, I guess I kind of categorized them as silos,
Mm-hmm.
And we have we're an ESL school, and so we have these tremendously effective and dedicated ESL teachers. And then we have a large special education department as well. One of our programs is for students with multiple disabilities, and so we have a large program there. And so what we had is a lot of teams kind of working effectively, but our kind of, again, I'll use the terms kind of north south east west communication wasn't as consistent and concise as it could have been.
If you came in new as a principal and there wasn't anything in place as far as a leadership team or guiding coalition, how would you recommend somebody starts?
Yeah, I think you would. And everybody's leadership style is a little bit different. You'll listen to some guys, I believe it's Mike Matos, would tell you to identify those people and invite them on. I like to engender trust of my teams. And so, what I would do is I'd say, hey, we're gonna have this committee, and this is going to be kind of the purpose of it. Please, nominate somebody from your team to come be, the kind of the representative and the spokesperson, and bring them together that way, and kind of put that back on put it back on the team of teachers.
Yeah, that was the case when I came here this year. There wasn't at least recently, there wasn't a staff leadership team or, like a parent advisory or other stakeholder group. And it's been interesting to see kind of the reaction of staff. We took teachers and had a meet as a content area PLC, which is, pretty typical for secondary schools, and had them kind of elect a facilitator. And then when we're at our first training we're doing a couple of weeks ago, those teachers had a really hard time understanding, like, you are a leader, you are here to represent, the math team. and it's like people want to have input, and people want to be involved, but then it's like, wait, yeah, I am the leader of my team. It doesn't mean you make all the decisions and you're responsible for everything, but it's a little bit different when staff haven't been in that position. And
right.
It was the other thing that was interesting. You talked about having that cross section and trying to include all those silos, so all staff feel like they're involved and included in communication and decisions. We had our content area leaders saying, hey, we don't have enough representation. We got to get a counselor. We got to get an elective teacher. It's like, yes, we do. It's not just math and reading or,
right.
core area staff. So yeah, the parents too. We had parent teacher conferences this week, and I tried to recruit a couple volunteers, and a lot of parents are like, well, what is a parent advisory? And yeah, one of the things that I didn't expect, some of the students that were there with their parents, they're like, you don't want my mom, Mr. McKelkey. And I said, well, why not? She'll tell you how it is. And I'm like, those are the people we want. If we ask for input, we want to hear the truth. Don't beat around the bush and just tell us everything's great, because we know that's not true. So yeah. What would you say is something really unique about the culture of your school, Brad?
This is a building that, and I kind of picked this up right off the bat. Our mission is, to provide social, emotional, and academic support to ensure all students learn. And I think this is a school that truly embraces, especially that social and emotional piece, and putting that on the same level playing field as the academics. Our staff cares very deeply about every single one of our kids, and not to say that other schools don't. And I guess I've been fortunate enough in my career to work in schools that feel that way. But it is a living, breathing element of Hillcrest Elementary, that every kid is cared for as an individual and supported as an individual. And I think it's come through. We talk about kind of the issues in the world of education right now with teacher recruitment and retention. And, I'm sure where you guys are at, hiring is probably as difficult, if not more difficult, than, where we're at here in Northeast Wyoming, in Gillette. But I feel like our culture and how it feels in our building has allowed us to attract some teachers and get some people to come work here because of that culture. So that's another reason why it's vitally important. You want people to come to work for you, and you want them to stay.
Yeah. And that ultimately means more than, a small hiring bonus or a little higher salary. I think if people feel like, this is the kind of school, this is the kind of district I want to be in, that's what attracts people and keeps people. Absolutely. How about one other, this is kind of off topic, but you and I have talked about this a little bit, and I think we both have birthdays coming up on November 6th, right? For kids.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that'll be my oldest daughter will turn 4. And then which one of yours has a birthday?
It's our middle son. He'll be 3. Yep. He'll be turning 3 on the 6th. And it also happens to be my mom's birthday as well.
Oh, nice. It's a big day. Yeah.
It is a big day. Yep.
So how do you balance, or what advice would you have? I think one of the realities of being a new administrator is you're feeling buried, and the time commitment is probably the greatest that first year or two.
Mm-hmm.
what advice or help would you offer administrators that are also trying to be a husband or a wife, a dad or a mom, as well as a principal?
The first thing I would say is you have to acknowledge the difficulty of it, and that it's going to be hard, and it's going to wear you out, especially early on. I had this. I started my administrative career, and my wife and I, we didn't have kids. I was able to dedicate a tremendous amount of time to the job, and didn't have, but now as a dad of three, from ages 5 down to going to be a year old in December, the job has changed, and I think you really ultimately have to start with, if you're talking leader and me talk, what are your big rocks, or what are your priorities, what are the things you have to get done, and then for me personally, I'm completely routine driven during the school year. I'm waking up at the same time every single day. Like, my morning looks the same, barring a major need to get something done, like a big deadline coming up or something like that. I'm trying to get out of the building at the same time in the afternoons and the evenings, and when I get home, I'm home. I think I heard it on the last episode of Transformative Principal that I heard you on. When you're home, you have to be home. You have to be present with your family. If your phone's dinging with an email, let it ding and approach it in the morning. Because if you don't set those boundaries for yourself, then you won't be effective. I have I'm fortunate here in Gillette. We have quite a large number. It's a large school district. We have several elementary schools, and there's a good cohesion with our elementary school principals. And I've got another principal who's got 4 kids, and they're younger. And we talk frequently about if I'm not focused on being a good dad, and a good husband, there's no way I can be an effective principal.
Yeah.
And so it's really how do you dedicate your time resources, because time's a valuable commodity, and you're not gaining any more of it no matter how much you try. So how are you going to divide up the time that you have?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've struggled with that. I know, like, last school year, I told my wife, Emily, I'm going to be home in time for dinner, which of course you get a pass when there's games and conferences and board meetings and stuff, but I'm going to be home in time for dinner. And maybe 8-9 weeks into the school year, I came home, put my stuff down, sat at the dinner table, and I was kind of bragging, like, hey, honey, look, I haven't missed dinner, for this many weeks, thinking I deserved a gold star. And then I'll never forget, she goes, yeah, well, why don't you start coming home and maybe cooking once a week? And I was like, you think you're doing a good job as a dad, and then you're like, all I was doing was showing up.
Right.
And with little kids, during the week, they're going to bed early, and that's hard, because I've struggled just the kind of the guilt where if you're not present when you're home, your kids pick up on that, your spouse picks up on that. But you also feel guilty if you're not getting things done that need to be done at school.
Yeah.
And that's a hard, there's always more work to do at home and at school. So I guess just kind of having those routines in place and those boundaries, and a lot of that I think comes from the cell phone too. Shut the dang thing off when you get home.
You really have to. You kind of have to put it aside, and I've looked at so many different, like, how do I organize myself? Organization being such a major part of what we do, and how do you organize? How do you prioritize? How do you delegate when what can you delegate as a principal versus what you can't delegate as a principal? One of the things I really appreciate about my staff in those reflective conversations we had, one of our teachers, one of our veteran teachers, she brought up, like, let us take things off your plate. And like, I really appreciated that sentiment from them, because and that's a hard thing. I've put a lot of time into trying to develop different organizational systems, going out and finding these different leadership podcasts. There's a wealth of resources out there and of ideas, and so just looking through those things and discovering what works for you. But at the end of the day, my administrative life got better. I think the biggest thing that made like the most significant change I made is that I said, I'm going home at this time and I won't be working when I get home unless something major comes up, or there's a massive deadline coming. And just making that change, that really helped. And I did that, I would say really kind of started that last year. And I think it's helped tremendously.
Yeah. Well, Brad, tell the listeners, what's the best way to get in contact with you if they have questions or they want to chat?
Yeah. If anybody wants to chat, you can shoot me an email. It's B Gregorich, GREGORICH at ccsd1schools.net. That's probably the best way. Email. I'll have to tell you, your conversation you had with Jethro last time about your Twitter account. I'm right there with you. Long-time lurker, short time contributor to the space. Unless it's something about Packers football, then you might find me. But yeah, I'm not a huge social media guy. And I know that's definitely the world that we're living in. But email is probably the best way.
Okay.
So.
Thanks, Brad. Hey, last question we always want to end with on the podcast. What can leaders do this week to be more of a transformative principal like you?
Oh, I think you absolutely, as a leader of a school, as a leader of any organization, acknowledge the fact that you aren't always going to be the expert in the room. You don't always have all the answers, and be open to the feedback from your staff, and seek their feedback and be ready to listen to it. We're not always going to be able to implement feedback, and some decisions land solely on the shoulders of an administrator, of the principal. But seek that feedback, be open about seeking that feedback, and be willing to be reflective, and when it's maybe not something you want to hear, because we've always got to be evolving as school leaders. So
great.
Open and reflective.
Yeah, that's great, Brad. Thank you again. Really appreciate having a chance to have you on the show this morning.
Yeah, absolutely.